Hello, I'm Virginia Crowe, and I'm here today with Ronan Beckman, who's going to be talking to us about his new story in the Historical Writers Forum's anthology, To Wear a Heart So White. The story is called Carte de Vista. Have I pronounced that right?
Carte de Viste. Yeah, Carte de Viste.
Activist. Okay. I knew I'd get that one wrong. Um, so we're very lucky today to have Ronan talking to us about this story, what inspired it, how it's written, and hopefully you'll be so inspired listening to him talking that you'll be dashing off to get your copy. The link for this will be in the information below the video, so please check that out.
Yeah,
So,
thank you.
Ronan, first of all, can you tell us something about yourself and your writing?
Okay, yeah. I'm an American who's been living in Britain for most of my adult life. So I've been here for about 33 years. I'm recently retired, so I'm hoping that I can spend more time doing writing. But my main writing is kind of based on family history characters that I've kind of come across when researching family history. So yeah, my first novel is a Regency era based novel, Actress of Repute, and that's all about an actress in London who happened to be my wife's third great grandmother, but she was one of the first Cinderellas on the stage in Drury Lane. So that's kind of cool. And I also wrote I found a biography of my wife's great great grandfather, who was a coal miner and trade union leader, one of the first secretaries of the TUSC. And I found old writings of his, and I just republished that. It's Visions of the Mine, and that's a really rare book that was really hard to find. So I've put it into different places like the British Library and various union libraries and museum libraries that are involved with coal mining. So
Oh, yeah,
still a
fantastic. So,
thing.
where was he based?
He was Lancashire, so he was around the Wigan area, and but he became MP for Walthamstow down near London, and actually was running against a Scotch manufacturer, Dewar's label. So yeah, and he beat him in a by-election, so that was kind of cool.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
yeah, so he was also MP for Parr in Lancashire, I think. Yeah.
Mhm.
So
Oh, wow, fantastic. Super. So, I think I'm right in saying that this story, I know I'm going off piste here a little bit,
yeah,
but is one of your ancestors too,
that's
was one of
correct.
the inspirations.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and then this leads us right on to question two. So, can you tell us a bit about the inspiration for this story?
Okay, yeah. So this story is based on the life of my third great grandfather, who was a sergeant in the army in Sweden. And I didn't know anything about him. So I happened to write to a cousin in the USA, and my cousin in the USA sent me a copy of a poem that's all written in Swedish, and it sounds very poetic in Swedish, but the translation in English is not so poetic.
Oh,
But it actually, the story was really, really interesting. So she sent me a photograph, and all this poem kind of outlined his whole life, which really fascinated me when I first read through it. I thought, oh gosh, I'd really love to write about him,
mhm.
but I didn't know how I would go about it. There's not enough for a novel, and I don't know if you would want to actually read about a novel about cranky old Sven Nander. But so
I
this,
got a bit of a soft spot for him, I have to
yeah, yeah,
admit.
yeah, I do too. He's my favorite relative, I think, that I've uncovered, and he's got a lot of flaws, but that's what I love about
Yeah,
him.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so that was the main inspiration, and also, she sent this photograph as well. So, that we have this photo of old Sven, and he
I
was
have to be
quite
honest, I don't see the family resemblance there,
no,
but
no,
yeah.
not at all, and I'm glad because actually he's quite, but never mind. Uh, but he was born in 1791, and I was just saying, look, I'm looking at a person that has experienced. I can see him, and it really brought characters to life. A lot of times when you're doing family history, it's just names. But I had so much more to go with. I had names, and I also had this poem, which was an inspiration to kind of start digging and researching and finding out more about his life. And, actually, the more I dug, I actually contacted relatives in Sweden. He had an unusual surname because most Swedish people are Johnsons or Petersons, or so it's really hard. But he had the last name of Stenander, and that came from the village that he kind of trained in the army. So he was named after kind of all the people in the army in this military base. So it really centered where he was at. And there's only like about 60, 70 people with this surname in Sweden. So it
Mhm.
helped me to find a cousin. And one cousin was an English teacher, so that was really helpful. And he dug up all kinds of, interesting stories. So he made Swedish newspapers. This is from 1987. So I thought, oh, there's somebody that people are still talking about to this day. And I think he would really love to know that, that his kind of
Yes, that
story is,
did strike me.
yeah, yeah. So yeah, it's been an interesting journey that I've kind of been exploring over many years now, but it's kind of unfolded, and I feel like now it's come to fruition thanks to you guys and having the anthology. So that's been a really great opportunity.
It is a fantastic story. Yeah, so it's a pleasure to include it in there.
Thank you.
A lot of it, by the nature of his very, very colourful life, features lots of flashback sections. So, what was the trickiest or the easiest part of including that in the story?
Well, I've always kind of wondered, how would I get all these things together in a story? Because he had such a rich and weird, varied life with all these experiences, and there's still a lot of bits that are missing out of his storyline. But everything that's in those flashbacks was included pretty much in these lines of the poem. So that really gave me the framework of, oh, right, okay, so I've got all these events that have happened in his life. Now, how can I put it back together? And having the story kind of offered me that opportunity because he's sitting in a prison cell. He's got nothing else to do. So he's reflecting back on his life and all the things that have happened,
Mhm.
good and bad in the past. Yeah.
Mhm. Oh, fantastic. So, so actually, the poem kind of gave you that structure. And
Yeah. Yeah.
so, is there like a verse from the poem
Yeah.
that matches up to each one?
Yeah, so so the verses are kind of like, oh, I got the Swedish. That's not going to help me much. Let's see. Yeah, so it's things like the English isn't as poetic, but like he reached the seventh grade, he was able to get a church position to help pay for his studies. He did some preaching in Huseby, and from then on, he called himself Stenander. So there's 13 lines, and it's all kind of like this, and it's kind of going back bit by bit, piece by piece of all the events, and you can read through in the story, in the flashbacks. A lot of those events are based on stanzas of the poem. Now, I went in researching kind of old newspapers or documentation to try to find out some of these stories as well too. And interestingly, because the poem was written and kept in the family and stuff, it's got a very positive spin. And I
Mhm.
was wondering, is that the real true story? Actually, I think there's two sides to this, and because there's all this glory of him having this medal and everything, but I've gotten kind of hints of uh, people that have kind of questioned that. So on his photograph, he's got the Medal of St. George's, which was from the Tsar of Russia, Tsar Nicholas. And it's like, well, how did he get that? He's in Sweden, how did he get that? So on his deathbed almost, a neighbor, his famous neighbor that's in the story, kind of excused him. He was drunk and he was saying, "Oh, I bet you just stole that medal off a dead body." And Sven just clobbers him with the clothes. I couldn't put that in the story, but I thought, oh, that's really great. But there is that kind of, are you who you say you are? Uh,
Mhm.
have you done all these great deeds? So I wanted to keep that question mark in there, and that's for the reader to kind of discern and decide for themselves.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah. I mean, well, this again takes us very nicely on to the next question about research. I love research, and, it's the things like that, the little anecdotes that you come across that suddenly someone, like you were saying before, who's just a name, springs to life as soon as you have just even like the tiniest little thing. I recently was off doing a genealogy hunt down in England, and I discovered that my many great times grandfather he was a tailor and he used to do all his work sitting cross-legged on the floor. And,
Oh, wow.
suddenly he just like springs to life, even though
Mm,
it's such a tiny part of who he would have been.
mm,
Yeah, it just kind of speaks to you. Mhm.
yeah. So when this story actually came up, the anthology, I was like, oh wow, this is great. A couple of years ago, so this was a more recent discovery. I found out through a newspaper article that he went to prison, and I couldn't understand the Swedish, so I went on Facebook, and there's a Swedish American site where a lot of people help each other out, and they said, well, oh, he went to prison because he was accusing a neighbor of stealing his photograph. It's like, no, the photograph, I got it, and it's like, and it really was interesting. So I started looking up newspaper articles and commentary. So he made national news because he was a 78-year-old man going to prison for this deed that you can read about. But it was interesting. A lot of the newspaper stories were like this great warrior soldier. He's brave enough to go to prison with, no worries and stuff like that. And there's that going on. And then some people were writing comments, well, he's gone to prison. Why are you glorifying him? Why are you making him out to be a hero? It's
Yeah,
not a
so
great
it clearly wasn't just the family who had the positive
Yeah,
in there. Yeah.
yeah,
Mm.
yeah. No, I think people kind of bought the story of him being this, great warrior because that's the way he kind of wanted to present himself, all
Yeah.
the time. Any opportunity to bring out a war story, he would do. I suspect. I kind
Yeah.
of get a feeling about him. He had a lot of, pride in what he accomplished and all the work he was doing. And I think, yeah, yeah, that could be his downfall, really.
Well, like I said before, very colourful life. He had plenty to be proud of. So,
Yeah.
yeah. What was if you had to pick like the single most surprising thing you found while you were researching, what would you say that was?
Um, well, I mean, this is going way back, probably before the story is that, I linked up with these cousins in Sweden. So my English teacher cousin was really great. So he hooked up with the last line of my family that remained in Sweden. Most of my family emigrated to USA or Canada. So there was one little branch of family. So I met up with them, and it was just amazing because they had the home farm, which was near to where Sven lived, and they hooked up a horse and cart. And so I was riding. It was like going back in time, and we went to
Mhm.
the village where my grandfather grew up, which was very near where Sven was. Um, but the most amazing thing, that little story I told you about him clubbing his neighbor with a stick. We went to that house where he actually was, where he was on his bed, where he was living with his grandson. And so I've been to that house. So that just really, you can't beat that experience of actually having been in the place where he was and
Yeah.
really feeling his presence. So I would say all those little things over the years have kind of added up to being the kind of most surprising. If you asked me, 30 years ago, if I would ever do this, it was impossible for me. I'm adopted, so I didn't know anything about my family history. So this was beyond my wildest dreams. I thought if I could get one name or something, that would be great. And now I have this really rich, varied family history that I can kind of tap into. It's a dream come true. It's
Yeah,
been
that
really
must
great.
be amazing to be able to then put yourself back into your family
Mm,
and
mm.
not just as yourself, but also offer all of this back to them as well.
Yeah. Yeah,
Mhm.
it was really strange. So I had when I went out to visit, a cousin had passed away, an elderly cousin had passed away a few months before, and he had this big old photo album. And even though I was very new to this family, they didn't know the people in the pictures, and I did. And I was able to actually start saying, oh, that's this person. And they're getting their pen out and labeling things because they didn't have labels on the photos. So I thought, wow, yeah, that was really a great full circle moment. And it's really strange, even as a kid growing up, I didn't know anything about being Swedish or having a Swedish background. I didn't really realize that, but I always felt it. It was really strange. So
Yeah,
I had a nickname as the Swede in high school. People called me the Swede, which was really weird. It's
that is
really
really
strange.
weird.
Yeah.
But these things obviously they come through, don't they? So yeah.
Yeah, I think that it's almost, destiny. Some way,
Mhm.
I'm a strong believer in serendipity and destiny and things being put in place. And I think a lot of historians kind of believe that. People who are really into history, you kind of have things fall into your lap surprisingly. It's like, oh wow, I've got this treasure. What do I do with it? Yeah.
Exactly. There's only so many times you can have coincidence before it means
Yeah,
something else. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Yeah. I think there's somebody pulling the strings in the background saying, yeah, right. Do something with it. Yeah.
Sven is a very relatable character. I guess because he is so real, so 3D, and so flawed, and yet, I I really had a soft spot for him, even though he was a really grumpy, cantankerous old man.
Great
But
heel game.
I couldn't help it. I really was rooting
Yeah.
for him. What, if anything, do you hope that your readers can learn or take from his story?
Yeah. I think so many stories are black and white. You have the very good character that's absolutely pure, or you have the person that's, black and evil, and, it's these kind of two extremes. And I think all people are really shades of gray. It's all those in betweens. And as you said, there's so much to love and like about cranky old Sven. And I really do love him. He's a great character. But he does have a lot of flaws. So, I can understand completely if you come away, not really liking him very much because, maybe that's what you're fixating on. So I think for the main thing for the reader, I would really like is for them to have an open mind and kind of realize that there are these nuances. Everybody's not truly evil or truly good. There's a whole mixture of in between in everybody to some extent. I think, you may be more on one side than the other, but um, yeah, no, it was. And also, I kind of felt a responsibility to him to try to portray him as truly as I could, and yet not be saccharine sweet and kind of lifting him up and revering him, maybe in a way that other relatives and people in the past have done. And I hope I've done that in a respectful way so that I don't make family upset. But I can just imagine him though being a soldier and he's going to swear and be, cranky and irritable because I would be if I was sitting in a wet tent with musket fire going on all around me. It's not fun.
Yeah, I think
So
most people would.
yeah. But I think he's an interesting character too, in that he started off in the priesthood and studying to be, this and that just wasn't him.
Yeah.
And so he even in those old days was able to kind of break away from everything, all those sacrifices that his parents were making for him to go down this very practical and respectable path. It's like, no, I want to be a soldier, and he realizing that that was really his strength, his hot temper could be put to good use.
Yeah, I think that's a really important thing as well, because I think sometimes people who have a hot temper, they can feel like they're labeled by it and they kind of can't move away from it. But yeah, sometimes it's not a bad thing to have a bit of
Yeah,
fire. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So without giving too much away, because there are quite a few twists and turns in the story, but knowing how it ends, what would you say is the biggest crime in the story?
I really struggle with this one, but I do think it is kind of pride and stubbornness, because I think that's his most clear trait is that he's so stubborn and refuses to believe he's wrong about anything. And I think that often lands him into trouble. It actually gets him out of trouble sometimes because there's an incident in the book where his stubbornness and refusal to kind of follow rules actually saved his life and the life of many others. So it's like you say, this kind of negative quality can have positives sometimes, but I think in this case, it was this pride and stubbornness that actually landed him in prison that he didn't need to go to. But it's something in the back of my mind makes me kind of think that he secretly enjoyed this punishment and this publicity that kind of came out of it. One interesting thing I just remembered too about where he was imprisoned as well too. It's a hotel now, and you can actually go. I'm dying to go there and actually stay. All the prison cells have been turned into hotel rooms, and you
And do
can
you know
kind
which one was his?
no, I don't. I made it up because I saw online they had a picture of this cell with the number 63. So I put that there, and I thought, I wanted him to have the view of the
Yeah.
town and
Mhm.
things like that. And it's kind of situated where you could see that. I have no idea what it's like. And that's the hard time thing when you're kind of trying to reimagine history. It's great if you can go and visit. It's great having the internet to try to kind of piece those things together, but we don't always have that at hand. I'm going to be doing a lot of writing about places I've never been to. I'm sure you've had to do that, and times we've never been able to go back to. You have to reimagine it and have a little bit of dramatic license, I guess, when you're writing, and that's where the fiction comes in, historical fiction, that you're
Exactly.
allowed a little leeway. Mm.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't decide if sometimes it's better if something, I mean, from the point of view of a writer, sometimes it's better if there's nothing left because
Mm.
then you get a sort of
TV.
clear slate. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And finally, what is next for your writing?
Right. Lots of things. I've got a sequel to the actress kind of book, and I'm so close to the end. I know I said this last time. I've only got like a few chapters left, and then I need to edit it and get that out. So I'm excited about that. Uh, Longer term, I'd like to do a little bit of, maybe historical biography. There's a writer, an artist that was a cousin of my wife's that was roommate of Mark Twain. And he was a famous cartoonist all over the USA and San Francisco and all the way to Montreal, Washington, D.C., everywhere. So he's lived an interesting life. And I was thinking of doing that as fiction, but I think I would like to go factual with him. So that's a job to do. And then I'd like to write a little bit about my kind of own personal autobiography of my adoption birth search kind of thing, because I think that's interesting, knowing that I was Swedish even before I knew I was Swedish. I
Yeah,
think things
exactly.
be interesting. So lots of things. And now I'm recently retired, so I'm hoping have the time to actually sit down, and I just need to be very dedicated with it and get down to it and do it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we all know it's one of those things that we say, but
Oh,
we
research.
know it
Research is the
happens.
biggest time waster, because I love the research. Yeah, it's like, oh, I got to research. No, you don't. You need to, right? There's always something else to research, isn't there?
Oh yeah, yeah. New rabbit hole to go down and get
Yeah,
completely lost.
definitely.
But my
Definitely.
goodness, your family and your wife's family sound amazing.
Yeah, well, I think Sven's probably the most interesting character in my family. Most of my family were pretty boring Swedish peasants. And then I've got a lot of Irish family that I don't know anything about. So, but they were from very humble origins. But interestingly, I think in this anthology, I had a choice of criminals to kind of choose from because
Okay.
my grandfather was arrested and put into prison for 3 years for forgery in Sweden of forging silver coins. So I was thinking about writing a story about him. Yeah, there's a whole host of different ones. My wife has yeah, somebody who was transported to Australia, who was actually a great musician, and he was one of the greatest Australian musicians. But then he got arrested over there for bigamy and all kinds of stuff. So he would make another lots of material to for future stories, I suppose. But what was interesting about the anthology and kind of reading through it was that family history kind of inspired two or three of the other writers as well, which I thought was interesting. So we all have these skeletons in our closets, I
Yeah.
suppose. So it's
And do you
however,
think it's also fair to say that because of that, looking back, we kind of forgive them everything that they did? Yeah.
I think because they're interesting, you can find out information about them. And so, there's almost a kind of hook to kind of get you into knowing more about them because you want to know the whole story. Were they innocent? What was the reason for why they did what they did? Um, Whereas, if everybody just lived a nice life, that's great, but there's nothing, no paper trail or
Yeah.
anything kind of flesh them out. So, yeah, it's interesting, isn't it?
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, I don't research as much as you do on Family Tree, but I do like to kind of work out if I can, add a new name to the tree. But yeah, I think what you said about how when you have that paper trail, someone does just spring to life, and like you said before about the photograph, that's just fantastic. Because suddenly they're a person and not just a name.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's the challenge for writers because we're not always as fortunate to have a portrait or, the last anthology we did was, uh, all about art. And so a lot of people wrote about portraits and the characters were based on the people in portraits. So there's something about having that visual image to sear in the mind that can really help you to formulate words and ideas about that person. But if you don't have that, I think it's a little bit, more of a challenge, or it could be a freedom. I don't know. Like you said, you're freer to make them whoever you want them to be. I don't know.
Yes,
I kind of need
it's
that structure.
yeah. Somewhere there's a good middle ground, I think. Yeah. Yeah.
Mm,
Well,
mm.
we're just about out of time. So, is there anything you'd like to add?
I think I said this last time. I just want to thank everybody involved with the project. I think that story might not have gotten down if I didn't have the opportunity to join in the anthology. So thank you very much for that. For potential readers, I think it's a great opportunity for you to read and sample different eras in history, different writers, and you may find somebody that you really kind of switch on to and you really, really like their work. So you may delve into further writing that they've come out with. I hope that's the case. It certainly has, the last anthology reading through that, it introduced me into genres that I wouldn't have normally have read before. I'm not really as well versed in ancient historical fiction and things from the very very deep past. Usually, I've never gone past the Tudors really, so it was a really new opportunity for me to explore that end of things. So it's great. So give it a try. It's quite reasonable. So it's a good way to do
Very
that.
reasonable. Very reasonable.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for including your story in this anthology too. It is a fabulous story. So please make sure you check out the buy link in the information just below this video. And I am sure you will, well, I'm sure you will love the anthology, but I'm sure you will have strong feelings about Sven one way or the other. Absolutely, definitely. Yeah. Thank you so much, Ronan. And yeah. Good luck
Thank
with
you.
everything that's coming up.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. Take care. Bye.